Aloha and welcome to this local media debate featuring the candidates for Mayor of Maui County. I'm Chelsea Davis from Hawaii News Now, and I'll be serving as tonight's debate moderator. Sitting next to me is our panel of my fellow journalists that cover Maui County. Please welcome Colleen Uechi from the Maui News and Marina Starleaf Riker from Civil Beat. This is a first of its kind event in Maui County, where 3 local news organizations have partnered with Akaku Maui Community Media to organize and broadcast a mayoral debate. We're here in the beautiful upcountry Maui at Seabury Hall's A'ali'i Kuhonua Creative Arts Center. And the 2 candidates for mayor are ready to debate the top issues facing voters this election. We're going to begin with questions from Colleen and Marina, covering a wide range of topics from housing to climate change. They'll ask a question, then a candidate will have 1 minute to answer, followed by a 1-minute rebuttal from the other candidate. And every once in a while, we'll open the floor for follow-up questions and discussion. Throughout the evening, students from Seabury Hall's AP Government class will also be quizzing the candidates, and we'll finish the debate by giving Mr. Bissen and Mr. Victorino the opportunity to ask each other a question of their choice. Now, let's welcome the 2 candidates for Mayor of Maui County to the debate stage, Mr. Richard Bissen and Mr. Michael Victorino. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of our system, I want to remind the audience to please refrain from applauding or making noise during the debate. Let's begin with the first topic of housing. Marina will have the first question, and Mr. Victorino will start us off with a 1-minute answer. Marina, first question.
The County Council this year earmarked $58 million into the county's Affordable Housing Fund. How would your administration plan to spend that?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank everyone for being here this evening. First of all, we already have had plans to build a number of affordable units, both in Central and West and South Maui at this time. 7% of the real property tax assessment was put in by me and in my original budget, and the council added more. Right now, we have 1,500 units that are ready to start with the Wailuku, or should say Waikapu Town Country, and we have more in Kihei and in South Maui, West Maui, that we're moving on right now. So that money is pretty much earmarked for a number of projects that both the council and the administration have agreed upon.
Okay. Mr. Bissen, do you have a rebuttal? 1 minute.
So I guess the affordable fund can be used, to answer your question, to purchase land, to help folks use it for down payments, to also use that fund to help folks in different ways who cannot afford the prices that we have today. That was the whole intent of the Affordable Housing Fund. It's very broad, the uses that can be used for. So I would want to meet with my housing director and find out what sort of projects they're already working on. I don't necessarily mean affordable housing projects, but I mean to say plans that they have for using that, and that's how I would use it.
Okay. Next up, we have Colleen with another housing-related question that goes to Mr. Bissen first. Colleen.
Maui County recently entered into a public-private partnership with Waikapu Country Town to provide county wastewater services in exchange for more workforce housing funds. Can you give me some examples of other housing partnerships that your administration would pursue?
Well, I think we would seek public-private partnerships with every housing development that is being used. And the reason for that is I think the county should be putting in the infrastructure on each of those projects. The reason for that is that's what drives prices down. I think infrastructure is probably 35% of the cost of a home today. So if the county can absorb that cost by putting in roads, putting in sewer, putting in water, that would save homeowners tremendously. And that alone makes it a private-public partnership. I also think the reason that's important is we team with other developers. What that allows us to do is to help determine some of the other terms, like the price of the home, working with those developers or builders. So I would want that in every single project that the county can possibly work with.
Mr. Victorino, you have 1 minute for your rebuttal.
You know, the public-private partnership was designed to not only help us build this waste treatment plant, which has been long overdue for Central Maui. We have an antiquated system that exists in Kahului, abutting a bird sanctuary and the ocean on the other side, a park and small businesses. So this was necessary. What it does is not only provide a waste treatment plant for this project, but for projects around there, and eventually we will connect all of Central Maui to this system, which will create 12 to 15 million gallons of water, R1 water, every day to be utilized for farming and for irrigation of parks and other areas abutting this. So this kind of partnership is not just about housing, and we do have separate funds for first-time homeowners. We have a special fund for that, and we have some other funds that we've set aside for that purpose.
Okay. Now let's open the floor up to some housing-related follow-up questions. Marina, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so you both have talked about how you're both supportive of public-private partnerships, but can you talk about how your big ideas on housing differ from each other?
Mr. Victorino, we'll start with you
Okay,
first.
I didn't know who was starting. I believe mine has been broad-based. It is really a right aware of not only affordable rentals, but attainable housing. You know, it's not just about purchasing, but having areas where we can now rent houses, lease homes, or lease apartments so that people can eventually build equity and buy. So I call that buy to rent, rent to buy, and lease to buy. And these are the areas that I believe we need to continue so we can help our workforce housing and those with the 80% and lower AMI have the opportunity to one day own their own place and be able to build equity during that period of time and also build their credit at the same moment. So it's a broad spectrum of the way I want to do it and the way our administration has approached it.
Mr. Bissen, same question for you. What is your answer?
So I think what we need to focus on is existing infrastructure, what already is in place, which is why we favor, I think the difference, probably the biggest difference between us is we have a short-term plan, which is accessory dwelling units, building what we would call ohana or cottages on existing properties because they already have their sewer and their water connected in most instances. Also trying to repurpose what we say commercial space, vacant commercial space. Again, existing infrastructure is already there with the addition of parking. And then, of course, our third phase, the longer-term phase, what we've called kama'aina housing. We use that term because the focus we want is on who is buying the house. When we use the term affordable housing, the focus is on the cost of the home. And we seem to think that's the goal. But the goal really is putting kama'aina residents into those homes. So we want to focus on who's living in the house.
Up next, we've got Seabury Hall 7th grader Kai Daniel on stage to ask both candidates a question. Mr. Victorino will start off with the first answer. Kai, go ahead with your question.
Good evening. I was wondering what your plan to remedy the growing issue of homelessness on Maui would be.
Right now, we have many options. We are now expanding some of the homeless facilities that we do have. As you saw, we built in Waiala'i Park those pallet homes. Now we're looking at doing that at some other locations, small, tiny homes to help them get in. The airport has not become available because the airport division has told us that in the next 6 months to a year, they're going to expand the airport and start building out in some additional areas where the rental cars are. And so we've now ascertained some more land, and we will be announcing very soon how we'll build in West Maui and South Maui additional homeless shelters like we have with Kahale Akeola and Maui Life.
Mr. Bissen, you have 1 minute for your rebuttal.
The Cost of Government Commission issued a recent report that says the first thing is we don't have enough transition homes. So that's obviously, or transition housing that we need to focus on. It also talks about how our agencies, the social service agencies, are not coordinated or not working together as they so, and that's not unusual. People have different ideas or different solutions. But what the recommendation from the Cost of Government Commission was that we need to be better coordinated in that. The plans we had, which maybe the mayor touched on a little bit, was to utilize space at the old rent-a-car lots so that our people who are working homeless, people who don't have homes but have cars, have jobs, could have a place where they could shower and wash their laundry and rest and charge their electronic devices. So our hope is to find places such as that to help folks.
Next up, we have Marina with another. Thank you, Kai. Next up, we have Marina with another housing-related question that goes to Mr. Bissen first. Marina.
Some people say that the county should take a more active role in building affordable housing by developing on county-owned land. How would your administration plan to accomplish that?
You know, I think that sounds like a good idea when you first say it, but what you really have to work in the details is how will that get paid back to the county by the homeowner? Because while that would reduce the cost of the house tremendously if you got free land, of course, you're just paying for the home. The question has to be, how do you decide which of our residents to give that to? And so I think we have to have a carefully planned repayment. It could be a low-cost loan, a no-interest loan. But I think if we're going to use county assets, which as the mayor, it's your duty to protect the county's assets. I think if you're going to use that land for that purpose, it's very important that we allow, so that the process is fair for everyone. Whoever applies for that there's a repayment plan.
Mr. Victorino, 1 minute for your rebuttal.
Well, I have been working on an idea for the longest time where, again, as I mentioned earlier, we will build units and they would be rented or leased to own. And that would be the first step to get people out of the homelessness situation. The transitional housing, Maui has led that for many years with Kahale Akiola, Family Life Center, and other facilities. So we need to expand that. I do disagree with Richard in the sense that we have an inventory of our lands. We know what lands are abutting the infrastructure that is needed and the wraparound services that are so sorely needed by these people. And so we need to build in those areas in particular to help maintain and give them an opportunity for a quality of life and a willingness to get out of the homelessness and into being a productive citizen.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this housing section of tonight's debate with this question from Colleen. Mr. Victorino answering first. Colleen.
The county has looked to buy apartment complexes for millions of dollars after landlords have sought to raise rents. What can the county do to help keep rental projects affordable in the long term so we're not footing the bill years later?
Well, part of it was the Lahaina Wayside apartments. The challenge we had there, it was sold to an individual who had sought to make it short-term rentals. And so it would take 20 families that have housing right now out of the marketplace, and we are acutely short right now. So what we did is, with the council's agreement, we are buying that apartment to keep it in affordability in perpetuity. If we own the land and we own the property, we can dictate what it means to stay in perpetuity and make sure that the rentals and the people that live there will not be forced out with rental increases or substantial rental increases. We also have to look at programs rental assistance that help people with these various apartment complexes that can keep them in there for long term. And when we make these agreements, we've got to make them for 50, 75 years whenever we let these developers build what we call affordable rental units.
I think that's a great question because it raises the point I made earlier. There are things the county can do in those situations. If you want to zone that so it cannot be used for short-term vacation rentals, if you wanted to put a limit or a cap on how much rent can be increased, what percentage you can increase rent. I mean, there are other alternatives. I don't think we can buy ourselves out of all of this by the county being so generous and spending the rest of the taxpayers' money for one unit of 20. Think about the cost that would create, or the trend that would cause. I don't know how much public input went into this decision to simply buy it, but again, being in an election year, people were happy to spend that money because it was such an item in the news, and it appears to have made, satisfied the short-term problem. But I think there's going to be a long-term one when we have to pay that bill.
Colleen, do you have any follow-up questions for either of the candidates?
I do. It sounds like you disagree on the use of county funds, or the level of involvement that county should take in building affordable housing or rental units. Can you both address the issues that you feel are in your opponent's plans in the county's involvement?
Mr. Bissen, how about you take that question first?
Well, I think I just answered in my answer that the concern I have is, if we're going to take $11 million to help 20 families, then what are we going to do for 40 families? What are we going to do for 50 families? One of the concerns is, I don't know how much that plan was vetted, how much the community had a chance to weigh in on that. It seems like it was, because it was in the news, there was a lot of controversy. Families were protesting what happened. I don't know that we know the whole backstory to what the plan for that was supposed to be, but it concerns me if that's our new policy, is to buy homes so that families aren't displaced. I mean, I'm not sure where that stops, so I guess that's my biggest concern is that our new housing policy to buy land so people can stay in their homes. I think there are other ways we could have addressed that.
Mr. Victorino, do you want to answer that question?
Well, with the Affordable Housing Fund, which we were discussing earlier, it makes this money available for those kinds of situations. If Judge Bissen had watched the news, he would have seen that we had checked the zoning, and it was zoned for short-term rentals. It was available for that purpose. Yes, we can protect it in the future, but right now 20 families would be displaced, and we'd have short-term rentals in Lahaina town, more than we need right now. So, this was important to protect those families. How much is it worth a family's well-being and livelihood? I can't put a price tag on any of your families. I would never do that. But I help when we can, but we're also cognizant of the repercussions later. This is not a policy. This was a decision vetted through with the council and myself, and there was public input and at the council meeting. So I'm very comfortable in what we've done and the rationale behind of it.
The irony.
Hold on.
I didn't know we had another response.
Hold on. Marina, do you have any follow-up questions for either of the candidates?
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
The irony to that is the county is the one who sets the zoning. So to say, well, it was zoned for short-term rental, that's because the county zoned it that way. If the county wants it to be not short-term, then the county can do that. So it's not as if we're pointing to somebody, some other entity. We are the ones that decide that.
Well, I'll disagree with that, because it was zoned already, and you cannot change it after the fact and then say, oh, now I'm going to take it back and not make it short-term rental. That's a taking, and you've been in the court of law, that you cannot do that. So with that being said, we took the appropriate action, and both the council, the public, and I agreed that in this case, it was a well and a prudent action that needed to be done.
Okay, let's change topics now to tourism and the economy. Marina, you've got the first question. Mr. Bissen, you will have the first response. Marina.
Maui has for decades talked about diversifying its economy, but in 2019, half of our jobs were still tied to tourism. Mr. Victorino, you've suggested expanding the wellness industry, and Mr. Bissen, you've suggested processing venison as a possibility. What actions should the county take to invest in those industries?
Mr. Bissen, yes.
Okay, so if we're going to talk specifically about access there, which the folks that live up country know this better than most, the problem with farmers that have to deal with their crops being eaten, ranchers having their grazing lands, eaten. It's obviously a health problem. If it gets into our watershed areas, it's a tremendous issue. At least on a health issue, there is a potential. It's not going to replace tourism, but there's a potential for us to make that into an industry and not just an eradication. What it would require is that we have mobile slaughterhouses, that we have inspectors from the USDA to inspect the hunts and the kills if we want those to be processed. We have to do workforce development. We have to increase people who can process, who can manufacture, not manufacture, but work on distribution and making that something available not only in restaurants, but available for sale online.
Mr. Victorino, you have 1 minute for your rebuttal.
Yes, and we've already started. We have one mobile slaughterhouse on Molokai, 2 more on order to be coming in. One of the bigger challenges we face is having a USDA inspector, because that is required by law to have a USDA inspector. When the hunt happens and the meat is brought in, they have to check it for disease. If it's good, it can be utilized. If it's not, if it's disease infested, it has to be dumped. And also, the areas that we are looking at, this is not for eradication, but mitigation, lowering the herd's counts. And I believe there is a good business. You know, I've heard some very good prices for venison out there. But also we could utilize that for our homeless. Our food bank would be one of those that would be a big benefactor of it. And so we are continuing to move in that area. In healthcare, we want to set up careers for healthcare so that our youngsters can stay here with livable wage jobs, work here, and take care of all of us here in Maui County.
So we're staying on the topic of tourism with this next question from Colleen, directed at Mr. Bissen. Excuse me, Mr. Victorino first, followed by Mr. Bissen. Colleen.
At a time when the county is looking to shift away from tourism, we are also relying more heavily on taxes from the industry. How can we make sure the industry pays its fair share while easing our reliance on tourism?
Well, right now, the industry pays almost 50%, I think 48-point-something% of all real property tax that is collected comes from the hospitality industry. So we are heavily dependent, and that's what made Maui very strong in these last 2 bond ratings that we've had, the strong economic driver as our hospitality industry. But that's playing with Russian roulette. That's a dangerous situation. So that's why agriculture is one of the big mainstay, because we need to become sustainable. We need to have enough food to take care of our people and not have to bring in so much. You know, at one time, the Hawaiian Islands had 1 million people before Captain Cook came, and they were self-sustaining. We now still bring in about 85% of all the food we consume is brought in. And so we need to continue to work with Food Hub, food innovations, and making sure that we help our farmers with our new Department of Ag develop and become businesses that thrive, not just survive.
Mr. Bissen, you have 1 minute for your rebuttal.
So when we talk about tourism, I think we should focus on the work that's already been done by the Maui Nui Destination 2022-2023 plan, which was a group of stakeholders that already came together and already talked about how we can. The latest buzzword now is regenerative tourism. It used to be ecotourism. It used to be sustainable tourism. Today the term that's used is regenerative tourism. I think we recognize that it's a major economic driver for us. Not sure it's something we could ever replace, but if we wanted to, we'd have to have that industry up and running first. I don't think it's something we can just ignore the impacts. And the issue that comes up in our community today is over-tourism, when tourists and locals have impacts, for example, the road to Hana, or not being able to pass in some parts of that road. So that's when I think the issue of tourism becomes dangerous for our citizens.
Marina, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I'm wondering what you see as the county's role in managing tourism or over-tourism.
Mr. Bissen.
I think the county has a role in managing tourism. For example, I think we should consider the road to Hana. We should consider having a toll booth, one at Twin Falls, one at, I don't even know what it's called, Tedesche Winery anymore, but up at the winery in Ulupalakua. We should charge tourists, not locals, that want to use that road. We should also consider having peak times that are only open to locals to travel the road, maybe between the hours of 6 and 8 or 6 and 9, where people are coming out of Hana to work or going in at a certain time of the day. I think the county can have a role in that by being creative and innovative, being bold in their ideas, and not just letting things happen to us. We can create our own future. by our own ideas. And I think that's something that the local population would appreciate, and probably the tourists, not having to feel like they're, imposing, coming in at the wrong times of day. We can have buses, we can have shuttles, meet in certain areas. That's just one example, but that seems to be the one in the news a lot lately. So I think the county can play a very active role. We get all kinds of benefits from the tourist industry. I don't see why we can't ask them to be partners with us in managing.
Mr. Victorino, we want to give you a chance to respond.
Well, with that being said, we've already started with our reservation systems, both for our national park and for Wainapa Napa. And we're moving now into Iao and other places. But the road to Hana is state on one side, county on the other. And the state has been reluctant to change, but they are now talking about how we can work together. I have been in talks with ITSNIFN and the Department of Transportation. Also, our Department of Public Works, which handles the backside P. Lani Highway. And we are looking at different hours for setting up, the ability for people to come in and out and not have visitors, make it for what we call resident-only hours. As far as toll booths, we have been told by the feds we cannot put toll booths. Okay, toll booths have to be installed on interstates, not on roadways. And so we are looking at some alternatives with reservation systems that we can then let the tourists know, hey, at this time, there's no space for you. Please don't come in. And just like what they do with Haleakala National Park and Wainapa Napa, we close them down at certain points when they're over capacity. And that way we will keep them and our visitors and residents happy.
Now let's welcome Seabury Hall 10th grader Kylie Cavanilla to the stage to ask a question. Mr. Bissen will start us off with the first 1-minute response, followed by Mr. Victorino. Kylie.
Aloha. How will you plan to manage or mitigate over-tourism and the impacts it has on our island and local communities? The island of Maui is unable to sustain such large populations of daily visitors and at trails, beaches, and the availability of products such as groceries are impacted by the surplus of people.
So I think a little bit of what we just touched on, I think following some of the recommendations from the Maui Nui Destination Plan would be a start. Again, they've already discussed many of these issues. You're absolutely right. When Mayor Carvalho, Elmer Carvalho, designed Ka'anapali and Wailea, the idea was that the tourists would remain in those locations and it would not impact the locals. We've come to see, as things have evolved, that that's not the case, that tourists want to be in other places. They're not staying in hotels, they're staying in short-term rentals. And so we already know, the issue is that lots of people make their living off of tourism, whether it's small business, not just the large hotels. So we have to be mindful of the impacts that has on our local residents who make a living serving tourists. But I think we can manage it better by, as we do, as the mayor mentioned, the hours, for example, at Haleakala, when you can go, when you can't go. I think we need to implement those, continue to implement those. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Victorino?
Thank you for that question, young lady. Mr. Bissen has covered a few of those items that I've talked about. And we know that your future depends on how we manage things today. And so for me, it's a matter of looking at all the right sizing of areas. Yes, wellness and healthcare could be a big part of it when we can put this in our hospitality resort areas where they can get well and stay within the area, like what Mr. Bissen has said. That was the design of our forefathers. Also, making sure we produce our own food so that we can take care of our locals and make sure that our residents are taken care of first, and then the visitors, they pay the higher price if that is deemed necessary. But also to make sure that we fair with everyone. And that's important. At the end of the day, your future depends on all the actions we take today. And that's what we're here for. And so I thank you for asking that question.
Thank you, Kylie. Great question. Okay, let's keep discussing tourism in Maui County with this next question from Marina. Mr. Victorino, you will go first, followed by Mr. Bissen. Marina.
You both brought up fees and reservation systems as a way to manage over-tourism. Where would you like to put those things?
Mr. Victorino?
I did not hear the question, I'm sorry.
You both brought up fees and reservation systems as ways to manage tourism. Where would you like to see those things?
Well, first of all, in all the resort destinations, in the areas where people want to go, like Wainapanapa, Iao, Kipaniwai, all our beach parks, and where our Park Maui now is moving in that direction. By the beginning of next year, we hope to have a system where all of our parks will have free parking for our residents. Certain times of the day will be free, all of the parking. Certain times of the day, just certain select parking stalls, and the visitor will have to pay. Reservations for attractions like Twin Falls or places like that where we know we can only hold so many, and that's what they've done in Haleakala and many of our national parks. We've replicated it at Wainapanapa, and it's been a real success. And so we now want to move into our other attractions. But our beach parks are where we've had the biggest challenge. And I believe by limiting the number of commercial activities like I did, you cannot have any commercial activity on Sundays and holidays. It is for our residents and our residents only for our beach parks.
Mr. Bissen, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Thank you. I think we are already doing this, as mentioned, at Haleakala National Park, where it used to be a free-for-all. Now there are times you have to make a reservation in order to go there so that we're not overcrowding and over capacity. I think that can also be done. It's been brought up. The beaches are the places that our local residents will say, you know, there's not enough parking for them, there's not enough room for them to go. So I suppose those make sense to manage those areas. I think the whole idea behind managing tourism is that if tourists know that certain times of the year they won't be able to have as much access to these areas as they're used to, that they would come at another time. That's the whole idea behind this. It's not just to give people a hard time or to make money off of people who come to visit, but it's to manage when they come to our island. And that's what has to happen. We have to get this information out to people so they adjust their behavior accordingly.
Now, if you live on Molokai and Lanai, Colleen has a question that might interest you. Mr. Bissen, you will answer first, followed by Mr. Victorino. Colleen.
Molokai and Lanai have steadily lost transportation options, including the Molokai Ferry and Hawaiian Airlines commuter airline. What could the county do to help Molokai and Lanai residents who deal with the high costs of traveling off-island on a regular basis?
So having just traveled to Molokai recently, Mokulele Airlines had changed our flight without any, obviously they just said, oh, you're not going at 9, you're going at 10 now. And talking to the residents on both Lanai and Molokai, their number one concern is exactly that question you asked. And I think the mayor can have a role, an active mayor, can meet with not only the state, the Department of Transportation, whether it's the governor or the director of the Department of Transportation. It's not a situation where we cannot, it's the state, it's this or that. The mayor has a say in how we want our citizens treated. Now, again, these are the same citizens that vote for all of the elected officials, not just county officers. They vote for the state folks as well. So I think the mayor needs to be that leader who meets with the rest of those folks involved in that decision.
Mr. Victorino, you have 1 minute.
And thank you, because I have been meeting with our federal people like Brian Schatz, Maisie Hirono. I'm looking to declare Molokai essential service so they can have the necessary transportation. Molokai has been affected a lot more adversely than Lanai. Molokai only has one form of transportation, Mokulele. And when Mokulele doesn't run, is delayed, cancels flight, these people are stuck. Also for medical treatment, many of them are going to Honolulu, which Mokulele serves. For Lanai in itself, we have Expeditions, which does a great job, has a regular ferry that goes all day, I think 4 times a day, back and forth. But, they also have Mokulele. And of course, Larry Ellison has his own little airlines that he uses for his visitors, but he offers to the public at times when they are open seats. So there are more forms of transportation for Lanai, but we need to, I've been working with the feds now to name Molokai an essential need and have them be able to provide additional services to Molokai at a reasonable price.
Colleen, we have some time to ask follow-up questions about tourism and the economy before we move on to the next topic. Do you have any follow-up questions for either candidates?
I do. I would like you both to get more specific about my earlier question. Mr. Victorino, you mentioned a big portion of our taxes do come from the tourism industry. You know, how do we deal with that fact? How do we generate another viable tax base to sustain us besides just tourism?
Well, you know, the world of technology is one of those areas that we can, and healthcare and wellness is another. Our agricultural businesses really struggle to make money, and so to tax them more heavily would not be a good thing. But these are areas where we can do virtual businesses, businesses that exist that we can, like what was during the pandemic, Papa Makeke, Kamaina First, Made in Maui, where we sell products and we have our entrepreneurs that can sell all of our different products virtually and not have to have the visitor come here to see it or feel it. You know, that's one of our areas. With wellness and healthcare, there is a lot of opportunities to make that a strong base tax-wise by making facilities available and making sure that the people that come here get the necessary service that they deserve. But the real benefactors would be you, the people of Maui County, because when those technicians and those people come and live here and work here, those services will be provided for our residents, so they don't have to go to Honolulu every time they need an MRI or something of that nature, that they can stay right here in Maui County and get the necessary services and not have to go always off island.
Mr. Bissen?
So we don't need to, we understand that we're not a manufacturing society, a community. We're a knowledge-based community. What we learned from the pandemic was that folks started doing more at home. We know a lot of people who flew here to do their business from here, virtual. What we need to do is establish more mentoring and more internship programs with our businesses that are right here on the island. We need to start working with our youth, like our Seabury Hall kids, from their junior and senior years in high school. Find out what kind of work they want to do in the long term. Bring them into these internships. If anyone is getting a grant from the County of Maui under my administration, they will be required to have an internship program in theirs. And I would like to meet with businesses, private businesses, and do the same. How can we expect to have a workforce if we're not doing anything to help develop that workforce? So that's where it starts. We need to be more business friendly, encourage entrepreneurs, encourage incubators here on our island. And there are a lot of people that can advance in terms of artificial intelligence and technology. And again, knowledge-based businesses is what we have to focus on. We're not going to do manufacturer-based. I don't know that agriculture itself can replace or make a dent in our tourism. Agriculture should be to self-sustain, food sovereignty and food security. But as far as establishing other businesses, I think it's going to come from knowledge-based. And speaking of health and wellness, we should be using cultural practices, lomi, ho'oponopono, la'au lapa'au. Those are the things we should be focusing on.
So next we'll be changing topics to talk about water-related issues. Marina, you've got the first question. Mr. Victorino, you will go first with your 1-minute answer. Marina.
Because of the way Maui's water system was originally built, upcountry residents frequently deal with water restrictions, while residents in South Maui are free to use what they want. How can the county address this inequality?
Well, one of the areas that we have changed our philosophy is now making sure that the county is responsible for developing sources. For a long time, almost 20 years, we've developed sources by having developers do it and taking a lion's share of the water credits and leaving us with little left over. And so it's really our responsibility to do that. Also, I put in $5 million for the upper Kula system and another $15 million from our infrastructure money to start building back the new infrastructure for upcountry. One of the biggest challenges upcountry water system has had was lack of source, but more important, lack of consistency in our system. We have 2-inch pipes going to 4-inch pipes, go to 6-inch pipe, down to 2-inch pipes, and it's been a real hodgepodge. And we've been working on that over the last 20 years to get that completed. But what we find is always the challenge comes up. We don't have enough time and money. Now with this influx of federal infrastructure money, we're going to dedicate a large portion of that to upcountry to make sure their system is really palatable and usable, and that the sources that we are talking about, especially ground sources, will be developed.
Mr. Bissen?
This is not a new issue. Mr. Victorino was on the council for 10 years while this was all an issue, and he's been mayor for almost 4 years, and it's still the issue. I think what has to change are our policies. And there is a policy with the county. Apparently, you can't have a water catchment and be on the water system at the same time. Anybody who's on the wait list for a water meter should be required to have a catchment system. Why can't there be two water systems? I know the concern is backflow, and that's dangerous, and that only happens if you've connected to the same system. People should be allowed to have both systems. In the event that there is a drought, they can use the catchment to at least, maybe it's not potable, but they can use it for other uses. This isn't a new thing. And the way we distribute water meters, to wait for somebody to have to pay all the money who's at the end of the line, when everybody in that line should be paying for that, we need to change our policies, is my answer to you.
Let's stay on the subject of water. Colleen, you've got the next question. Mr. Bissen, you will be first with a 1-minute response. Colleen.
When asked about drought, some people say it's more of a water management problem. Do you believe there are flaws in the way the county stores and delivers water? And if so, how would you fix that?
As I mentioned earlier, thank you for letting me continue. If there's a water catchment system, that would alleviate at least people not using potable water. Because when you cut your restriction down, that's for all of your use, but at least you'd have enough for your drinking water. I think one of the policies the county has, again, is water meters. I understand the sequence. When it's your turn, you get it. But think about a line of people that are on the same water line. If you're the guy at the end and you have to pay the big bill and the rest of the guys in the water, it's not your turn yet, so we're not going to put it in. If you get it, everybody on that line should be able to contribute, hui together, pay for the cost of that. And never mind you weren't the next in line, because you're making it efficient for the system. Because now you're clearing the way for other people on that wait list to have their water come delivered to them. So I do think we need to revisit the way we distribute and have been giving out, or really not giving out, water meters.
Mr. Victorino, you have 1 minute for your rebuttal.
Well, we need to develop sources, ground sources, which are more dependable than these surface, because every summer we run across droughts. And upcountry is almost 80% surface driven. And there's another challenge that, the Department of Water will tell you, our chemists will tell you, you can't mix groundwater with surface water without having some residual, because one uses chlorine, one uses chloramines. And this is another challenge. We have a hodgepodge of systems. So what we need to do is get an area where we do what we've been saying, is get it consistently in one system and be able to be interconnected with town. That's another thing that I've always said. During the rainy season, upcountry has a lot of water extra. Why not send it down to Paia and other areas? And during the summer months, when we can utilize water from our ground aquifer system in town, we can move it upcountry. These are other areas that we've talked about for many years, but never had the political wherewithal to do.
Okay, we have some time for follow-up questions. Colleen, how about you go first?
You both mentioned some solutions that you would have in response to these water issues that we brought up. Can you share your thoughts on what you think of your opponent's ideas to deal with these problems?
Mr. Victorino, how about you go first?
Well, I think my opponent had some good ideas. Something that I said when I was on the council, that we should, if we're going to put in a pipeline, have it done all the way and everybody pay their fair share to connect. And that way, that system's done. But there's also that legal and moral that if you put in your application and you're number 6 and then number 15, number 20 gets there first, how did that individual feel? How will that work when the upcountry water system, the meter system that was put in place was first come, first serve? Was well intended, well meant, and that's why we've been looking at what we can make a legal change. I've thought about putting in this, and this is one of the things I'll do in my next administration, my next term, is to put it on the ballot. Let you, the people, decide how you'd like us to handle it. And I would like to see it done where everyone would be fair again and have one line going in and everybody pay their fair share at that point.
And yet it's still not done. The problem is we need a policy. If you explain to number 6 that number 15 is going to get there if number 15 is on the line with everyone else, I think number 6 would understand that. The other thing about it is, what ends up happening is people wait so long to get their meter. And if at the end, by the time they say, oh, it's going to cost you $200,000 to put a meter in, guess what they say? Oh, never mind. So they don't get it anyway. And nobody on that line gets it. So the idea is I think idea is to give people water, right? It's to get water to people, not to keep it from them, not to make it expensive, not to make it hard to get, not to make them beg and stand in line and say, when can I get my water? It's to say, listen, the system isn't going to be 100% fair for everybody all the time. But just know this is how the system works. If you're at the end of the line, you all put it. If you're at the front of the line, then of course the guys behind you don't get it. It's not their turn. But if you're at the end of the line, it's your turn. Why should you have to pay all that? It's common sense.
Okay, Marina has another water-related question. This time, Mr. Victorino will be first with a 1-minute response. Marina.
There's been a push for the county to manage East Maui water that's been long controlled by plantations. What do you think about the county pursuing a 30-year water lease from the state instead of allowing it to go again to East Maui irrigation?
Well, first of all, I support the water authorities for the entire county. I think this is a first step in having people be able to manage their own water within their own areas. So I think that is the first thing that I agree that we need to do. Secondly, even though we apply for it, doesn't mean we get it. And even if we got it, then we'd have to make sure that all the necessary upgrades and repairs were done. And we have no idea, even when we did the analyzing of the system, East Maui irrigation system, it is really a challenge. And I want to make sure that the East Maui people are the first benefactors, not somebody else. So we need to bring everybody to the table. We need to change the approach that we've taken with the authority being the first step in getting water throughout the county, especially for the East Maui taro farmers and residents of East Maui.
Mr. Bissen, 1 minute.
I think the county should control the water. I don't think the county should manage the water. We have not shown any ability to do that, and so that's not something we should jump into. I also am concerned, as are others, as to what the cost would be for the county. But of course, we should control our own water. Water is the most important thing for us to survive here on this island. It's clear. With regard to the other two authorities, so we know of 3 water authorities, right? There's the Nawai'eha, there's the Komohana, which is in West Maui, and then there's East Maui. And that's not including the wells that were talked about earlier. If in my administration, what I'll have advisors from each of those 3 systems, where we'll have monthly meetings to project what issues are coming up with that water source, that water system. Are we online for allocation? Do we need to do repairs? But I'm really concerned that the taxpayers should be told how much it's going to cost for us to have that authority.
We're now joined by Seabury Hall 12th grader Carter Rosenthal, who will be asking a water-related question to Mr. Bissen first, then Mr. Victorino. Carter.
Hi, how do you plan to mitigate the environmental impacts associated with increasing development, population growth, and new housing projects? Specifically, how will our water resources and our coastal areas be protected?
Aloha, Carter. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the first thing I would do is use existing infrastructure to mitigate what you just said, the resources. Because many of those, or all of the projects that I'm talking about, already have the water and the sewer connected and worked out. For new projects, I think every decision we make will have a social impact, an economic impact, and environmental impact. And we need to be aware of that. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it worth to build homes for our people who are from here? What is that worth? So I think through the use of having wise counsel, talking to people that are in our various departments who are experts in their fields, will help us to lessen that impact. But I think we're always going to be faced with that. Building a new home comes with some impacts, but is it worth it? And the answer is usually yes.
Mr. Victorino?
Thank you for that question. Young man, there is a challenge we face protecting your future. And part of this challenge is managed retreat. We were building many times facilities and buildings, homes near the shoreline. As you've seen in Oahu, houses have fallen into the ocean. It's happening here in Maui, out in Kahana and other areas. So we now know better, so we have to manage that by making sure anything we build new build back. So to take over some of these infrastructure that my opponent is talking about may be very costly. And also to rehabilitate, asbestos, and many of these older buildings have many materials that it's better to tear down and start over. But then if we're going to do that, let's move back. Let's manage this retreat by having buildings built with setbacks of maybe 2,000, maybe a quarter of a mile from the ocean front, and leave the open space for your future so you can enjoy our beach fronts and enjoy the ambience of protecting our near shoreline.
Thank you so much, Carter, for your question.
Thank you.
We got one last water-related question for our candidates. This time, Colleen's turn to ask. Mr. Victorino will start us off with his 1-minute answer. Colleen.
The topic of water meters came up earlier. That's a long-time issue. Many candidates have talked about this. What are your specific plans to clear the water meter list in Upcountry and open it to new applicants?
Mr. Victorino.
Well, first of all, again, developing sources. And one of the other areas that I think we can really work on is reuse water. From Pukalani, which is being used, some of that water is being reused right now, their treatment plant, and the Haile Maile treatment plant, which has been left in bad disrepair. We need to partner with the company that owns it and look to make upgrades so that we can utilize the development that's coming up there. And my plan was to, and I did propose this to the council, is to make Makawao, because of the condensed number of homes in a similar area, put in the sewer lines and lead the main line down to this area so that we could treat the water and make that for agriculture and utilized in and irrigation. So this is some of the areas that I think we can better utilize R1 water in Upcountry, and also gray water is very important. That could be a big source of water for our residents.
Mr. Bissen.
So I think you're asking about water meters specifically, and I think I think the biggest issue we hear from our Upcountry residents is, how come I'm still on the wait list and they're building a brand new subdivision down the road from me? How come somebody else has gotten water and we don't have any water? And usually the answer is because that builder or developer found their own source of water and was able to build that. Well, if a developer can find water to build brand new homes, then there must be water for our people that already live there. I mean, so now we're going to start looking for wells. Now we're going to start trying to find water for our folks, or make R1 water from sewage water. I'm not exactly sure, but I think the idea I said earlier, the way to get people cleared is for people to hui together and pay for the water meter line for everybody on that line together. It makes the most sense, and it's the most fiscally responsible thing to do for those folks, again, who've been waiting some for 30 years, is what I'm told.
Let's see if our panelists of journalists have any follow-up questions. Marina, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the charter amendment to create the new water authorities. Mr. Victorino, I know you say you're for it, but if the amendment fails, would you still pursue the 30-year leases from the state?
I would look to continue that aspect of water authorities and make sure that that becomes available for all communities. I think it's important. Water is the essence of life. And when we talk about water meters Upcountry, that'd be one of the areas that they could help each other, because you can, by banding together and having their authority, this authority could dictate or tell the Department of Water, this is what we want, and we can go ahead and get it done. Again, either by ballot and have an initiative, and or by the community themselves stepping up. That way a county knows exactly what they want. And I've always felt that people should have the final say in all of these areas. Finally, I think one of the areas that I've really had concern with is the fact that we have never developed enough sources Upcountry because we've depended on surface water. But all of us know surface water at certain times of the year, especially summer months, drops tremendously. So an interconnected system with Central is still something that I've proposed and I will look into more closely, because I think when we connect water systems and have, like what they have in Oahu, an island-wide system where they have over 1 million plus people and never have water shortages, even when Red Hill was shut down, they were able to survive that. We can do that here, but we need to have an interconnected system, and I think that's something that we've long overlooked.
Mr. Bissen, do you have anything to say to that?
Well, I know we don't want to be like Oahu. I think we all know that. However, when it comes to our water sources, I'm not aware of an upcountry water authority because that would come from the East Maui folks, where the water comes from. And of course, the people in South Maui get their water from the Navaiha system. Like maybe 75% of our island's water comes. But I would say developing this water sources, whether they're wells or whether they're coming from other water authorities, is the most important thing we can do. Not just for our upcountry folks, but for all folks in here. You know, when we talk about water droughts, what we need to do as an island is make sure that we anticipate that. We know it's going to come. It comes from, in my opinion, active leadership, not passive leadership, where we know it's going to happen, and yet we just wait until the announcement comes, and then we do it again, and then the next year we do it again, and we do it again. But we need to get ahead of that. We need to do things, as I talked about, water catchments, whether water reservoirs or other issues that we can do. People just want us to do something. They want the leaders to do something. They don't want to wait to see it on a charter amendment. They don't want to wait for us to talk about it and form another committee and talk about it and talk about it. They want us to do something about it, and we can. That's why they vote us in.
Okay, next we're going to turn to the topic of climate change and sea level rise. Marina, you'll lead us off with the first climate question. Mr. Bissen, you have the first answer. Marina.
West Maui is one of the hardest hit regions in the state when it comes to coastal erosion. Tell me 3 things the county should do to combat that.
The county should consider managed retreat. Now, managed retreat is not something that is not that simple. It's, again, getting ahead of it. And it's not just in West Maui, there are other places. For businesses, you know, if you're talking about hotels, I don't know what their insurance policies cover. I don't know how much taxpayers would want to be responsible for those, but for homes, for residents, for kamaina that are on the water, on the shore, I think the county should consider swapping land with people that are on the water line. We should offer them Mauka lands in exchange for their lands. The county can, I mean, we don't know when, you know, things are going to collapse or fall in the ocean, but we know with ocean rise as well as erosion that it's going to happen at some point. So I'm not sure if I gave you 2 or 3, but I see my time's up, but I'll come back to it on the rebuttal.
Mr. Victorino, what is your response to what he just said?
Well, first of all, managed retreat has to be a systematic move with infrastructure being moved back also. Much of our sewer lines and water lines are along the sea line or the ocean front, and so we have to start moving all of that back. One of the biggest challenges we face is not many homes here in Maui County are being affected now, but in the future they can be. Hardening has proven to be a real detriment. So now we have to look at how we can replenish our dune system, our sand dune systems, putting in groins that we can replenish sand into our near shoreline, and how we can prevent anybody from building along the shorelines now. This is going to be very important. The setbacks are going to be important in the future. For those that are there, you know, if they're willing to swap land, that's maybe a good idea. But again, how many would want to do that is another story. And so I would like to make sure that the people, the public, were involved in it and they give me their response.
Let's stay on the topic of climate change. Colleen, you've got the next question. Mr. Victorino, you will have 1 minute to respond. Colleen.
Recent storms have devastated homes, businesses, our water system, flooded roadways. What's your plan to make our communities more resilient to severe weather before it happens?
Well, I think a lack of foresight in the past has made this occur. Building in wetlands has been a real challenge. But now we're looking at what we can do to put up on the higher parts of our, we need to put some water catchment or water retention basins so that they can hold back the water from coming down in the full force that it has come lately. Also, some cleaning up of our ditches and our streams are very important. There's an area called Maui Meadows that has been affected drastically. And we're looking at seeing that either one of 2 things can be done. We can put a drainage system in the back of the properties and hopefully that will solve the problem. Or maybe at one point we'll get to have to offer them to buy the place out, and so that we can move them from harm's way. Something like what we're talking about, exchanging a land and a home for where they can be safe instead of where they are now. We're learning that we got to be more prudent in where we build and how we build.
The issue of weather is not a new thing. As I said, my opponent has been in office for 14 years, and this is continuing to go on. We're not any better off than we were before. Clearly what we should be relying on is kupuna wisdom. We should be listening to those that have been here longer than most of us, who understand the patterns. Clearly, we have to stop the water before it gets to the shoreline, before it gets to South Maui. We know that, so there's things we need to do. Take care of our uplands, because that's where it all happens, whether it's planting trees, whether it's putting in a reservoir, but again, anticipating. I don't agree that we should be messing with Mother Nature and put a sandbag here, a sandbag there, and try to change the course of things, because that's not what's going to happen. Because Mother Nature is going to do what Mother Nature is going to do, and we shouldn't be sticking our nose in that. But there are things we can do to prevent some of the flooding that takes place and makes its way to our oceans. But we've known this. We've always known this.
Throughout the evening, students from Seabury Hall's AP Government class have been contributing their own debate questions. Now let's welcome 10th grader Zoe Mounts with the last student question of the evening. Mr. Bissen will answer first, then Mr. Victorino. Zoe, go ahead.
Good evening. I am concerned about the future of our island home as the effects of climate change become more and more apparent every day. What are some of the environmental issues that are closest to your hearts, and how do you plan to solve them during your term in service?
I think the first environmental issue we need to take care of is no more injection wells. I think we understand and we've learned that the courts have spoken loud and clear, and that's something we need to go. And there are some plans in the works for that. I think we need to take care of our water, as we've been talking about that for some time now, that topic. I think the road or the water, brown water that makes its way to our oceans and kills our reef and some of our sea life, I think those are things it's inexcusable that stuff still goes on and it's worse. And I guess those are three things. I don't know if you asked for three, but that I would focus on in my first term in office.
Mr. Victorino?
As he's mentioned, when we're talking about the injection wells, we've worked real hard over the last 4 years to set up the Honokawai system, where we will pump 6 million gallons a day up to Honokawai reservoir, and then utilize that for irrigation and creating a green zone, so we'll mitigate for brush fires up in West Maui. That's one of our first steps. We're also expanding our waste treatment water in Kihei. Right now we use over 50% of all our water that's produced, and we are going to get up to 75% by the year 2025, so that we will at least use very little, if at all, injection wells at that point. That's why the new plant in East Central Maui is important, because we will then turn that and not inject water into the ground in Central Maui. So those are some of the areas we're working on. But other areas is electrifying our fleets, getting more electric cars on the road, making sure the infrastructure. We just dedicated 6 hybrid buses, which reduce almost 71,000 gallons of oil each year that will be not used, fossil fuel not used. So the greenhouse effect will be lessened in our little island called Maui. And so we are moving in this area. And we all have to do a couple of things: recycle, reuse, and not be wasteful. And I think this is our responsibility, our kuleana as people, not only the county, but all of us. And your future will be secured if we continue moving on that path. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe, for your question. Colleen, do you have a climate-related follow-up question for either of the candidates?
I believe both of you expressed support for land swaps for properties more Mauka. And a lot of these coastal properties are multi-million-dollar properties, homes, as well as hotels. How would land swaps work? Are we giving hotels free land and potentially turning Mauka areas into hotel districts?
Mr. Bissen, how about you answer first?
I was not speaking of hotels. I said earlier, I think hotels probably have to deal with their insurance companies and their home offices to figure out what they're going to do. I was talking about homes, and I was talking about residents. And it's not just in West Maui. The North Shore also has the same issue. So the way it would work is we would offer a Kama'aina family a fair swap in terms of value for some Mauka land, and the government, the county, could take over that area. Number one, the issue of managed retreat is anticipating the problem before it happens, because it's much more expensive if you have to clean something out of the ocean or prevent it from falling in the ocean. So the whole idea behind it, managing the retreat from the shoreline, is exactly what it says. And so trying to get families to agree to move. Most families don't want to give up their property that they've had for years and years, but convincing them it's better, because then their land will have of no value. If you offer this to people and they refuse, that's all you can do. And when if their home falls into the ocean, there's nothing the county should or can do about that. So offering it in advance is, again, to Kama'aina, not to hotels.
Mr. Victorino, what is your response?
Well, helping our Kama'aina is paramount. Taking care of our residents first has always been my priority. And so in that respect, yes, I would be really in favor of doing what we can to offer them the ability to swap land. But there are also commercial businesses that our locals have had for many years that abut the ocean fronts now, and now are being threatened. Also, the infrastructure not only serves the hotels, but our local residents also. So that's another area that we have to start considering. How do we move back? We got to move the Honopi'ilani Highway from Cut Mountain over to Okumihami, because you all know what's happening every time we have king tides or south swells. The road is being inundated. And then in the next 3 to 5 years, that road will probably be swallowed up by rising sea level. So it's not just the Kama'aina homes that we're talking about. We have other issues that we've been working on proactively. And I agree, we have to be proactive. We have to think ahead of it. I've been here 14 years and we've been working hard at these issues all that time, because they haven't been simple issues. My opponent thinks you just snap a finger and settle it. I'm sorry to mention it. This has come through many years of not only what we've done, but what the rest of the world has done. And now we pay the price. But the young people, those 4 students that came here, they need to be protected. Just like my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I work for them to make sure that they are taken care of, that they have a future, that they can live here and raise their families here.
Mr. Bissen, I actually want to hear your response to what Mr. Victorino said.
No, I don't think we should snap our fingers. I think we should be active and not passive. I don't think we should blame everything on, well, that's the state's job, or that's the pandemic, or that's something out of our control. To me, that's a lack of leadership. That's a lack of taking accountability. It's a lack of being creative, innovative, and bold. And that's what I bring to the table. So it's not about snapping fingers. It's about getting to work and making things happen.
Now we'll dive into our final topic of the night, agriculture. We have a total of 3 questions. Marina will start us off. Mr. Victorino, you will answer first, followed by Mr. Bissen. Marina.
What do you see as the biggest challenge to food security here on Maui, Molokai, and Lanai? And what are you going to do as mayor to help our communities overcome that?
Well, we've already started. We started with our Department of Agriculture, which will be the first county Department of Agriculture in the state. And what it will do is make sure that our farmers have an opportunity not only to survive but to thrive. They will work with the FDA, the USDA, and other entities for grants, for mentoring to develop young farmers. That's going to be the charge of the Department of Ag. And Kali RC and Western Yap are 2 dynamic young people that I really feel are going to move us in the right direction. Also, putting our money where our mouth is, putting our waste treatment plant in central Maui so that we can use that 12 to 15 million gallons a day for agricultural uses and not use potable or some of our brackish wells, so we don't intrude into the groundwaters. These are very important, and also it recharges the aquifers. Finally, we are here at this point where we need food sustainability. Our food hubs are what we are working on right now.
Well, I'm glad to hear this, because the mayor was against the Department of Agriculture when it first came out, and now he's in favor of it because it's passed. And so, of course, we should make the best of it. The thing that farmers want is they want a processing facility so they can have a longer shelf life for their products and make its way to market. Farmers want lower prices for their water that they pay. Farmers want land. They want more like the ag park. They want the ag park, the cost of rental to not go up every so many years. That's what farmers want. They just want to be able to thrive in their business and what they do. I think for us, when we talk about food sovereignty and food security and sustainability, we bring 85% of our food in, right? So we know if there's a supply chain shortage or stoppage, that impacts us. Our food we need here grown here for our use, for our residents to use. That's what we need it for.
Colleen's up next with another ag-related question. Mr. Bissen, you have 1 minute to answer. Colleen.
Access deer have been disastrous for farmers and ranchers, and hunters say that they can help with the solution if they can have access to land, but private landowners are concerned about liability. What is the county's role in helping to solve this problem?
The county's role is, as mentioned earlier, to try to get more. I know we do have access to a portable unit for slaughterhouse, but we need more of those. The USDA, the farmers, the hunters, and there's only about 1 or 2% hunters on our island. And we have over 60,000 head, and 20,000 is a manageable number. So, this is not mitigation, this is eradication. When you talk to ranchers and farmers who have their crops devastated overnight by one herd, it's hard to believe. There were over 170 car collisions on our roads reported. That was just the ones reported. So we know, and again, this is coming to the point of a health hazard. If they make their way into our watershed, that's irreversible. So there's many reasons why we need to address and focus on access deer. Sort of making a processing part is besides the fact, because it has such a huge impact on our population.
Mr. Victorino, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, we are working on it, and we've been working on it for the last 4 or 5 years when it became apparent that we had to take bold action now. I've worked with the council, putting money in for not only fencing, but other programs to mitigate. I don't like to say eradicate, I say mitigate. Get the curds under control so that we can have a viable source of an economic engine. Venison could be a vital source, and my opponent has said that many times. And so I think this is very, very possible. But most importantly now is that we all work together, farmers, ranchers, as well as government, in helping each other, allowing the hunters to come into the areas and hunt, to put areas specific for hunting purposes so we can drive the herds into certain areas. And hunters tell me that way we can do a lot more killing and a lot more processing of venison right there and then. And so with these mobile slaughterhouses and the USDA there, we could then produce a lot more meat for the food bank, again, our needy, and most importantly, as a viable business for Maui County.
Marina, do you have any agriculture-related follow-up questions for either of the candidates?
Yeah, you both mentioned the lack of USDA inspectors. Can you talk about how you would push back or advocate to the federal government to get one of those here on Maui?
Well, right now I've been working on that with Senator Schatz and others to see if we can increase the number of USDA inspectors here in Maui County. They're going to put it in this year's budget to increase the numbers here in Maui County. And so we're looking hopefully to get 3 to 5 USDA inspectors this year and next on the island of Maui and Molokai and Lanai to share. And that way we can now produce more of our venison because we have more inspectors to take care of that.
In talking to hunters, they would like to take the classes and the training, those that already live on Maui, and have them become that. And that's a workforce development issue that we should explore because they're interested in it. They are, I would say, probably good at it. In other words, identifying a clean dispatch of a venison or of a deer. So I think it's going to come from us, not just, one of the things is, if you get a USDA person, I don't know if it's federal or state that we're talking about here, they're going to want to have to, it's like getting nurses and doctors, anybody else that moves here. They got to figure out how they're going to make their living. Are they going to be able to stay here? If we can work with people that are already living here, that already have an interest in this area, I think that would be the way to go, is try to offer these kinds of classes. I mean, I'm not exactly sure, and I'm not trying to mock the USDA, but my guess is somebody looks at it and says, okay, you hit it above the neck, there's nothing wrong with it, you can process it. I'm not sure if there's more than that that's required to inspect it, but I would think if we can grow our own inspectors here on Maui, that would give us a more viable source.
Colleen, do you have any
So
follow-up
first,
questions?
may I say something else? That is exactly what we want to do. By having the funding and positions in the federal government, we can hire locally. We can train them right here, and exactly what we're trying to achieve. But we have to have the positions to make sure we can have them working. Just taking the class is not going to solve all the problems. It'll help, but these will be the definite inspectors that are certified to take care of this issue.
Colleen, follow-up questions?
I believe, Victorino, you said the approach to access deer is mitigate, not eradicate. And Bissen, you said your approach is eradication, not mitigation, correct?
Yeah,
can you
it's
explain?
A crisis.
Yeah, can you both explain your stances behind those approaches and how your administration would go about that?
Victorino, how about you go first?
Okay. Mitigating means reducing of the herds. To get all these programs together, to bring down the herds down to a manageable size. Like we said, maybe 25,000, 25,000. But more importantly, if we're going to keep this as a sustainable business through the years, we also have to make sure that we manage the numbers, that we don't fall too low or eradicate, as my opponent has mentioned. You know, eradicate means get rid of. If we get rid of all of them, then we don't have that business anymore. So we got to know how to mitigate and make sure it's manageable. And that's what I'm looking at, a managed way of taking care of it, making it a business, making it a help for our needy, and most importantly, protecting our farmers and ranchers from the devastation. But you know, we only talk about axis deer. No one talks about ungulate pigs that really are causing more problems than axis deer at this time on when you're talking the wetlands. But we'll leave that to another point.
I think you know, I appreciate the distinction between eradicate and mitigate. I was suggesting that if you talk to the people that are most impacted by this, they're not interested in turning this into necessarily a product. They're so impacted by it, they just want them off their lands. So that is an eradication program. It's not, let's just reduce it to a size, manageable size. The thing about these deer is that they can multiply, they can have 2 breeding seasons in 14 months. And they can have 2 at the same time. So they are growing faster than we can control them. And it is without question the biggest concern for our watersheds. So when I say eradicate, that is exactly the word I mean. For those folks that are impacting those areas. This is not just, oh, we want to, you know, keep it as a business. The business is outweighed by the urgency.
We've got one last question from Colleen, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Mr. Bissen will answer first, followed by Mr. Victorino. Colleen.
Each of you have received lots of money from developers and high-profile business officials. How will you prove to voters that your policy decisions are not tied to your donors' interests?
Mr. Bissen.
I don't owe anyone anything. I have donors and I have constituents, and I'm here to serve my constituents. I think the way people can rest assured is they can look through my history of serving the community. I'm one of the few people that have run for office that have actually prosecuted and sentenced people who've committed corruption. So I understand that very well. And to me, this is a question of integrity. This is a question of character. And I have established that throughout my career on this island. All you can do is tell somebody what you're going to do in the future. You can't really show it to them. They can look at your past and decide. And that's what I offer. Like I said, I'm not connected to anyone. I don't owe anybody any promises. I've never made anybody a promise to donate to me. I haven't had anybody who works for me or anybody like that to have to make a donation. So that's all I can offer people is my word.
Mr. Victorino, 1 minute for your rebuttal.
Interesting, very interesting. Let me say it in this way, in this manner. One of the main reasons I have an opponent of this stature is because many of the developers were unhappy with me because I wouldn't do what they asked if it wasn't right. My constituents, and if you look at my donation list, I have a lot of small donations, $25, $50, $100, many constituents that support and believe in my message of equality and fairness. And I feel really good about that. The big money come because they play both sides of the fence. They give to him, they give to me. You look at the names, many similar names on the same list. And so that's the way they look at it. But if anybody questions my integrity, I really would challenge them to say that to my face, because I have never done anything that I've not been proud that was for the good of you, the people of Maui County, for your future, your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I do it for that purpose and not for money. But campaigns are run on money, and my opponent has gotten a lot of big money. I've gotten some, and I'm proud of what I've gotten, and I'm working with that to make this campaign a success so I can do 4 more years of making sure all of the things that we finally got started get completed or get close to completion, so whoever succeeds me will have a good path to deal with.
You know, the most interesting thing he just said.
Okay, hold on. Now we're going to have the opportunity to ask, you folks are going to have the opportunity to ask each other a question, so this is the perfect time. Mr. Bissen, how about you go first?
Okay. Mr. Victorino, when Mayor Arakawa left the mayor's office, his budget for the salaries of all of his employees in the office of the mayor was $2.5 million. In the latest budget you submitted, you've increased your budget to $3.7 million. That's just for salaries for your staff. How do you justify to the taxpayers who are struggling in our community an increase of over $1 million and a 45% increase for your staff for their salaries?
Well, first of all, many of the people that work for me do not make the kind of money that Mr. Bissen is mentioning. And I don't know where he got his numbers from. Is it only from the office of the mayor?
It's in your budget.
Only in the office of the mayor?
Absolutely.
Okay. And the office of the mayor includes all of our direct, my staff, me, all of our salaries go into that budget. But look at the council and how much they've increased theirs. On top of what they've done is put new offices all over this county. And, I look at the judge and the judiciary and how much they've increased. There is salaries that are band-aided by step movements and by union contract. And so we follow that very closely. And I know that the increases have not been substantial as indicated, because you're taking the whole sum of it. And we have not increased the number of bodies that Mayor Arakawa had. So I can say that some of that has changed, and also that we really manage our money well. And I feel very honored to have done what I've done to make sure during the pandemic, we were answering the phone 12 hours a day, making sure people got information, safe travels. We were at the airport. Many of my staff worked much time, overtime, and not got paid for it because they were there generously helping you, the people of Maui County.
Mr. Bissen, do you have a response to that? You have 1 minute.
The numbers are the numbers, and the good news is the public can check for themselves what the numbers were. I have no idea what he just said as far as how he explained that increase by saying, well, the council did that too, and the judiciary, I'm not exactly sure what the answer is. The question is very simple. You raise your budget for salaries only, by 45% over 4 years. He filed the budget. That's his budget. It's in there for everybody to see and read. Mm-hmm. And he has no explanation for it. He doesn't know why it's increased by over $1 million. And that's very telling.
Mr. Victorino, now is it your turn to ask Mr. Bissen a question. What is your question?
Well, I'd rather not ask him a question because I'd rather spend my time saying this. I've been honored to take care of this county for so many years and given my time, effort, and my manao for you. And, Mr. Bissen, he's a lawyer with many fancy words and many fancy things and I don't set in that standard. I apologize for that. And I do what is necessary to make sure you were safe and healthy during this pandemic, and now we are really moving into our diversified economy. I'm thankful for that, and I wish everyone well. And you can check the records, please do. I'm not afraid to say that. Go ahead and check the records. Check all of the departments and check all of them. And this much I'll say, I've put in prudent budgets every year, and the council has put more money in the budget each and every year over my 4 years. I will be the only mayor in the last 4 years. All the other mayors, when I was on council, we cut their budgets. But this mayor, every budget was increased, and the council saw fit to increase each and every year. And sometimes it was for good reasons, but many times we found flaws, and we saved that money and used it for other important issues.
Mr. Bissen?
400, so I'm going to take that as a question. A $400 million increase is our budget. That's what we have now. A $1.17 million budget, billion-dollar budget. Over $400 million we've increased just since 2018. I don't know how we are bragging that we are better off than the other counties just because we put more money in a budget that every one of you are going to be paying for. There were so many other ways we could have used that money. And to sit there and say, I'm proud that I've increased your budget that you have for a county is you don't normally hear that. And you know, when we were talking earlier about donors, you know, the mayor's office has the advantage as incumbent of using the county facilities, using his county people, using his county offices, calling it budget hearings, showing you present, past, and future projects, and calling that a budget hearing. So yeah, we raise money because when you're new, you got to go out there and you got to stand in line and pay for every community center you want, including taking out insurance. But if you're the mayor, you don't need to do that. You can run off of the taxpayers' money to run for your reelection. So yeah, he wants to point out there, sure. And his donors, yeah, they give money. His directors, the people that work under him, sure, I get it. But let's put it all out there. I mean, if you want to say, oh, you're raising a bunch of money.
You could wrap it up.
Yeah, and may I say, I'm going to say this.
Hold on,
This
Mr.
is
Bissen.
not fair. What he is saying, he's
One
gone
second.
over the amount
Hold on.
of time.
Mr. Victorino, Mr. Bissen.
No, you've gone over time.
1 second. Hold on. I'm going to
Okay.
have to interject.
Thank
Both
you.
of you. Mr. Bissen, you can wrap up your last statement, 15 seconds. Mr. Victorino, you'll have 1 minute response.
I've been watching his time and he has not stayed to the times. All I'm trying to say is the incumbent has an advantage that somebody running doesn't have. So of course that person has to raise money to get their message out. When he says in his statement, oh, you know, they asked me and I wouldn't do it, the difference is no one's asked me. No one's asked me for anything to get a donation. He admitted they actually asked him to do stuff.
Okay. Mr. Victorino, your 1 minute response.
Well, thank you. You know, it's really sad that we've gotten to this point. You know, I've always stayed the high road, and I'm going to stay the high road. You know, I can say this. I've never, and I've said, they've asked him. He won't admit it. And, you know, when he becomes mayor, you know, let's not interrupt. You just said that, sir. But, you know, I'm honored to be your mayor. I have never done anything that is improper or illegal. I've always worked within the system. And yet, you know, he says, oh, because I'm the incumbent, I have the advantage. We do budget hearings every year. Every year. No different. The last 2 years has been virtual. This year we can do it live. So I don't know what he's talking about. And we do tell what we've done in the past, what we're doing presently, and what we're planning in the future. That's what the budget is set by, the future needs of this county. And so I'm proud to say we've done it, and we've done it the right way. We've not deviated. Every mayor does the same thing. He'll do the same thing. And what he's trying to do is say, I have an advantage. Well, I have a big disadvantage because I have to step lightly because every place I go, if it's official business, it's not campaign. If it's campaign, that's different. But I go to many functions and you never hear me say, please vote for me. I do not do that because it is my responsibility to do and run this county. That's my first job, my only job, and I've done it to the best of my ability. And I want to thank you for giving me that opportunity, and I hope we'll
We're
continue
going to
that.
have each panelist ask one follow-up question to conclude the evening. Colleen, how about you go first? Do you have any other follow-up questions you want to ask?
Mr. Bissen, you brought up active, not passive leadership. Can you explain in detail how you would exercise active, not passive leadership? And for Mr. Victorino, can you give examples of ways that you have demonstrated active, not passive leadership?
An energetic leader meets with their staff weekly, not have their managing director meet with their staff once a month. That's a big difference between being an active and an energetic leader. Also, being able to lead by example, being a strategic thinker, being someone who is a problem solver, those are examples, I think, of active leadership. And we haven't seen that. This has been more of a passive type of leadership. That's what I'm saying.
Mr. Victorino?
Well, I have looked always at what's coming at us. We're always looking to make sure we're ahead of the curve. During the pandemic, I demonstrated that in many cases, Maui County was one of the safer counties in the state. We had vaccinations and we had testing kits. We were always being proactive in that area. In the area of county operations, we've done much in the area of, like, for example, on Saturdays, every other Saturday we open up our DMV, which many of you have told me was a great idea, and they're so happy with that. This is what we call active participation, listening to the community and then doing what is necessary and doing what is right. Sometimes we have to consult with unions, sometimes we have to consult with our departments, but many times they're willing to do what is necessary to take care of your needs. So I'm proud of what we've been able to do. I've always been big thought, big picture, getting ahead of the curve and making sure we set Maui up for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And that has been my way. That is the way I govern. That is the way I collaborate with everyone. And I have great recommendations with many of you. And I thank you for that. Mahalo for the evening.
Thank you. That concludes this mayoral candidates debate. Let's mahalo both candidates with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'd also like to say mahalo to Seabury Hall for hosting our debate in their beautiful A'ali'i Kuhonua Creative Arts Center. We also like to mahalo the two journalists that made up tonight's panel, Colleen Uechi from the Maui News and Marina Starleaf Riker from Civil Beat. I'm Chelsea Davis from Hawaii News Now, and on behalf of Akaku Maui Community Media, mahalo for joining us tonight. Aloha.
Good, Richard. Thank you. Thanks.